Okay, thank you all for being here this afternoon. I'm very pleased to share with you the story of the Kul-e-Tuk Parka, a research project I've been working on for the past several years. I accidentally discovered the Kul-e-Tuk while researching at the University of Toronto's Thomas Fisher Rare Books Library in preparation for the museum's 2017 exhibition, Fashioning Expo 67. While reading Style, a fashion industry trade journal that was founded in 1891 as the Canadian Dry Goods Review, I noticed a plethora of ads and articles promoting an appropriate Inuit-style parka starting in 1959, the Kul-e-Tuk, labeled as the first truly Canadian garment since the Red River Coat. I was familiar with the Red River Coat thanks to my colleague Cynthia Cooper's research and how it was appropriated from the blanket coats of the Métis people starting in the later 19th century and a Canadian children's style that endured for 100 years. The Kul-e-Tuk gained momentum in the mid-20th century as the Red River Coat's popularity was on the decline. During the pandemic, I began searching on Etsy and eBay to see if I could find Kul-e-Tuks, and it has since turned into a bit of an obsession. As of today, I've identified and purchased 10 examples of Kul-e-Tuks for men, women, and children, as well as identifying a boys' parka already held by the museum's dress, fashion, and textiles collection, all of which will be shared today. So I hope you enjoy this talk, but I also consider it as a call to the public, as if anyone has a Kul-e-Tuk in their possession, I'd love to see it. So today I'm going to present the complicated history of the Kul-e-Tuk and the matrix of factors that contributed to its runaway success in Canada and beyond from the late 1950s to the start of the 1980s. This exploration will touch on topics, like Cynthia said, including Montreal's garment manufacturing industry, the Hudson's Bay Company, downhill skiing, synthetic fibers, Cold War era colonial projects in the Arctic, and settler Canadian identity. We need to start the story with the Inuit and the animal skin clothing design practices they developed over millennia to survive and thrive in one of the harshest winter climates on Earth. Inuit skin clothing has served many purposes as innovative, high-tech protective apparel, as a visual marker of identity, as well as embodying broader cultural values and spiritual dimensions. The clothing attests to the great respect given to animals by the Inuit and the vital bond between the two, as Betty Eisenman describes in her book, Sinews of Survival, quote, garments transform their wearers, allowing them to acquire the strength, wisdom, and powers of the animals the clothes are made from. Traditional skin apparel design and construction are testaments to the knowledge, technical skill, and artistry of Inuit women, and by extension, the hunting abilities of their male counterparts. Inuit have primarily worn caribou skins for winter and seal for warmer seasons, with hides of wolverine and wolf, amongst others, incorporated into clothing, depending on geographical location and time of year. Caribou coats are composed of long, coarse guard hairs with a dense, soft underlayer, and the coat varies in thickness depending on the time of year the animal is harvested. At a microscopic level, caribou hair has an open, bubble wrap-like cellular structure, which efficiently traps air, acting as a superb insulator, yet the skin is relatively lightweight. Seal pelts are also extremely lightweight, but unlike caribou, do not shed when damp. Seal hair is quite flattened and porous with overlapping outer scales, which combined with a high concentration of hair oil provides excellent water repellency. An Inuit man's double-layer winter outfit can consist of 9 separate garments, but this research focuses on the Kul-e-Tuk outer parka. Although silhouette and adornment have historically varied across the Arctic, the sedentarization of the Inuit between the 1940s to the 1960s rendered parkas more homogeneous in their design, with the Western-style Kul-e-Tuk of the Inuvialuit being adopted across all regions. This Inuvialuit caribou Kul-e-Tuk at left shows several noteworthy design features. It is an ample pullover garment with a close-fitting hood trimmed with a fur ruff. Pattern pieces are kept to a minimum, shoulders are sloped, armholes are dropped to the bicep level and positioned slightly on the front of the garment with very roomy sleeves. Finally, its hem is adorned with graphic, contrasting cut and sewn fur pieces. At right are my illustrations from a study of a seal Kul-e-Tuk from Nunavik, which shows how shoulder and side seams extend onto the back body, and there is no back neck seam at the base of the pointed hood. These two Kul-e-Tuks bear witness to the high functionality and durability of Inuit garment design. Their construction minimizes the risk of seam splitting as they are strategically placed on areas of the body with less stress. Their oversized silhouette traps warm air and provides freedom of movement for the vigorous gestures required for hunting. The double-layer parka system of Kul-e-Tuk and the inner garment, the attigi, furthermore solves issues of humidity buildup and minimizes the risk of garments freezing, which could spell certain death in the Arctic cold. Europeans contacted the Inuit starting in the late 18th century, but it was over the 19th and early 20th centuries with the influx of explorers, missionaries, whalers, and the establishment of Hudson's Bay Company trading posts that Western material culture arrived in the Arctic, including woven fabrics. These were incorporated into established clothing practices, and the resulting hybrid styles attest to the creative adaptability of Inuit craftswomen, combining new materials with traditional design and construction methods. So how did a traditional Inuit Kul-e-Tuk transform into the mass market Kul-e-Tuk? Enter Nicholas McNevin Roberts, who had immigrated to Montreal from England with his family as a child before joining the Hudson's Bay Company in the Eastern Arctic as a trading post apprentice around 1935. Stationed throughout Nunavik, Roberts ingratiated himself with local Inuit communities, learned to speak fluent Inuktitut, and at some point before the early 1940s, acquired this cream wool duffel parka for himself from an Inuk craftswoman. In the post-war era, after stints with both the American and Canadian Air Forces, Roberts returned to Montreal as first a children's wear, later hosiery buyer for the Hudson's Bay until the early 1970s. This wool parka, given to the museum by Roberts's family in 2014, is a hybrid style, cut in an Inuit silhouette, but with Western woven fabrics. Although it has a zipper closure, it shows many similarities in its construction to the Inuvialuit caribou parka we just discussed. Sloped shoulders, oversized back body, dropped armholes positioned onto the front of the garment, and ample sleeves. The hood, close fitting with a thick fur ruff, has a very pointed peak and is cut in one with the back of the garment. The hem and sleeve edges are adorned with applied bands of graphic, geometric cut wool fabric and hand-embroidered chain stitches. Admiring its form follows function design, Roberts shopped his idea around for an Inuit-inspired parka to Montreal outerwear manufacturers during the mid-1950s. He piqued the interest of a former Hudson's Bay colleague, Terry O'Leary, general managers for Kitty Tog's manufacturing company, maker of infants and children's outerwear, and father of Kevin O'Leary, notorious Canadian businessman and television personality. Terry O'Leary asked Roberts for an Inuit-designed garment to modify for the Southern settler market as a children's coat. Based on my research, I believe that this cream wool parka was the garment appropriated for the Kul-e-Tuks that followed. Now, let's switch our focus to Montreal's garment industry, to Kitty Tog's and the licensed manufacturers who disseminated the Kul-e-Tuk across North America. The appropriated misnomer Kul-e-Tuk was trademarked by Kitty Tog's in March 1959 as a brand name for men's, women's, and children's jackets, but it was not the first time the name was used for mass market outerwear. In 1956, Oregon-based White Stag Manufacturing Company offered a range of feminine car coats as part of their autumn collection, which include the Kul-e-Tuk, although its silhouette bears no resemblance to Inuit men's traditional parkas. Coincidentally, White Stag had been manufacturing Northern Lights, Inuit-style ski and après-ski jackets since the early 1950s. Kul-e-Tuk secured licensing agreements with a number of Montreal manufacturers to produce the parkas. Designer Lydia Spurlick's brand, Lydia of Montreal for women, Aljac Sportswear for men and boys, Marquette Incorporated for girls, and Beaver Knitwear and Art Knitting Mills for children's and women's bulky knit sweaters, respectively. The Kul-e-Tuk collaboration was touted by the National Post at the time as, quote, the first instance of a number of Canadian firms joining together to produce a range that meets the requirements of the entire family. Kul-e-Tuks were priced from $14.95 for infant garments to $45 for women's styles, which is approximately $160 to $460 today. A promotional blitz for the parkas preceded their retail availability for the 1959 winter season, and the Kul-e-Tuks were marketed as fulfilling different needs based on the age and gender of the wearer. The children's garments were described as warm and practical, the women's Lydia parkas as attractive and fashionable, while Aljac men's garments were designated as rugged, utilitarian sports and workwear. This red Lydia Kul-e-Tuk is the earliest found example and dates from this initial 1959 winter season. There are aspects of this parka obviously copied from the Inuit-made Roberts example, namely its close-fitting peaked hood, cut in one with the back body, fur ruff, and the rows of brocaded ribbons and rickrack trimming the hem and sleeve edges. It diverges in its Western-style tailored armholes, straight set-in sleeves with hidden synthetic rib-knit storm cuffs, and vertical single-welt pockets at waist level. So let's just pause for a second to talk about the textiles from which the Kul-e-Tuks were made, a very important factor in their success, and one that I will elaborate on more in a little bit. Synthetic fibers were selected to imitate animal hides. Nylon fleece represented sealskin, while other models used acrylic fur fabrics meant to replicate caribou. Other models, advertised as wind and water resistant, were cut from wool or lightweight cotton nylon poplin blends, with some featuring plush acrylic fur linings. The range of colors available at the time of the product launch romantically referenced the northern landscape: Arctic white, caribou beige, aurora blue, and tundra brown. Our Lydia 1959 parka is the sundog red color and is cut from nylon fleece. Long-haired furs, primarily wolf and fox for adults and rabbit for infants, were initially used for the ruffs in 1959, as this Lydia parka at left shows. Many customers, however, complained that the real fur ruffs were not machine washable, so they were quickly replaced with a more easy care, chemically treated lamb's wool. An extant Kul-e-Tuk's caribou beige acrylic fur parka from 1960 shows this updated hood trim. When discussing the runaway success of the parkas with journalists at the time, Terry O'Leary cited caribou beige acrylic fur models as early bestsellers. The manufacturer also offered a short-lived and commercially unsuccessful Kul-e-Tuk accessory for children, the Seal-a-Pack, to be worn over the fur parka. These hooded zipper jackets, cut from nylon taffeta, again appropriated both the style and name of the Western Inuvialuit Seal-a-Pack or snow shirt. The Seal-a-Pack, a man's pullover parka cover, another hybrid style, is cut from white, durable cotton canvas or ticking, intended to keep snow off of furs and act as camouflage while hunting. So I'd like to switch gears again and briefly talk about a singular publicity trip to the Arctic that occurred in July of 1960 in anticipation of the Kul-e-Tuk's second winter season on the market. A team, including O'Leary and Roberts, traveled to Nunavut with boxes of Kul-e-Tuks as part of a Hudson's Bay Company initiative to stock the parkas across the Arctic in their stores. Photo shoots were staged in Iqaluit and Resolute Bay, with local Inuit acting as models. It was insisted that the point of the trip was not to exploit the Inuit. However, articles accompanying the published images spoke of the Kul-e-Tuk as legitimate outerwear due to its seeming acceptance by the Inuit people. The brightly colored Lydia models were a hit in Iqaluit in particular, but with Inuit men, which surprised and confused the team of manufacturers. Images of a beautiful young Iqaluit woman named Alicipi wearing a parka were widely circulated, with her stating how younger Inuit liked wearing Southern fashion in town, but she stressed how the synthetic Kul-e-Tuks would never be suitable replacements for Inuit-made garments to survive on the land. Americans also jumped on the parka bandwagon at the start of the 1960s. O'Leary forecasted the Kul-e-Tuk only rising in popularity with consumers, becoming, quote, as basic an item in Canada as the grass skirt is in Hawaii, and a lucrative souvenir item for visiting Americans. In fact, many Americans placed long-distance orders with Kul-e-Tuks for the parkas after seeing examples brought back to the United States by tourists. This interest led to Kul-e-Tuk signing a second licensing agreement south of the border with manufacturer Coatcraft Company of Philadelphia, who in turn sublicensed the style to Lakeland Manufacturing Company of Wisconsin and New York-based March and Mendel to outfit the whole family. The American licensees even offered a nylon raincoat version of the Kul-e-Tuk for the milder climates of California and the southern states. According to O'Leary, the Kul-e-Tuk was the first instance of American manufacturers licensing a design of Canadian origin. In the US, where the parkas were often described as Alaskan, they were marketed mainly as a youthful autumn college style. Other than Lydia of Montreal, who I will come back to in a moment, it's unclear how long the official licensees continued manufacturing parkas, but for the American companies, it seems the style was a passing trend that after a handful of winters had come and gone. Coatcraft had, for example, by 1961, begun advertising a hooded acrylic fur coat for girls, the Marinarka, very similar in silhouette to the Kul-e-Tuk, but trimmed with Tyrolean-style folk adornments. In Canada, the parkas remained popular and prolific. For Kul-e-Tuks, the Kul-e-Tuk was a cash cow and one of the company's big three, alongside pram sets and baby coats. Many manufacturers attempted to cash in on the Inuit parka market and skirted the protected brand name by calling their unlicensed copies Kul-e-Tuks, Anatuks, or simply describing them as Eskimo-style outerwear. It was the Lydia Kul-e-Tuks that received the most media attention, so I'd now like to take some time to specifically dive into the dissemination and styling of these feminine parkas. White Lydia Kul-e-Tuks were part of the female athlete wardrobe for the Canadian Winter Olympic team at Squaw Valley, California in 1960. The National Olympic Committee stated, quote, for once, instead of copying the stylings from other countries, Canadians went forth in outfits that were uniquely Canada's, the Kul-e-Tuk, the Hudson's Bay blanket coat, the real sealskin caps and snow boots. Downhill skier Anne Hegtveit accepted her medal for slalom, Canada's first ever gold for downhill skiing, wearing a Kul-e-Tuk, and her photo was printed widely in the national press at the time. During the Olympics, many images of spectators at Squaw Valley wearing Kul-e-Tuks and Inuit-style parkas were published in the Canadian and American fashion press. White Lydia parkas were part of the 24-piece official wardrobe given to the 7 Quebec Winter Carnival duchesses in 1960. Mary Jo Powell and Romaine Jenkinson, Miss Edmonton Eskimo in 1960 and 1961 respectively, were given white Kul-e-Tuks supplied by the Hudson's Bay Company as part of their Miss Grey Cup wardrobe. The Bay furthermore encouraged female Eskimos fans to purchase and wear white Kul-e-Tuks to all home games during the 1964 football season. For the 1964 Winter Olympics Games in Innsbruck, Austria, white Lydia Kul-e-Tuks were again given to Canadian female athletes as part of their casual walking out look. This second iteration of the Olympic parka was belted and featured complex machine-embroidered maple leaf designs in green and red. So the 1964 Olympic parka is a good segue to discuss how Lydia Kul-e-Tuks were styled into two distinct categories, the trendy and the traditional. Elaborate parkas like the Olympic style targeted a more fashion-oriented clientele. Kul-e-Tuks were cut from modish printed cotton nylon blend poplins and graphic woven brocades with mother-of-pearl button closures. There were a wide variety of adornments, from fringed hemlines to colorful machine-embroidered designs lifted from Inuit art with names like Eskimo, Upik, or Birds of Flight. One extant Lydia parka from 1964 is trimmed around the hem with beige lamb's wool, embroidered diamond shapes, and, like the 1964 Olympic parka, would have originally been styled with a tied belt. We can see on this model and in the corresponding ad, the more rounded hood silhouette as well. The hemline of a second design from 1965 is adorned with embroidered totem pole motifs, combining an Inuit silhouette with the art of Pacific Northwest Coast peoples. This indiscriminate appropriation was again on display several years later when Lydia's 1967 Aspen ski collection included a Kul-e-Tuk embroidered with Little Indian designs, which bear a resemblance to motifs found on Ute and Apache basketry, indigenous groups native to Colorado, but also pre-Columbian Aztec representations of gods of the dead. Finally, a geographical obliviousness on the part of manufacturers in relation to the Arctic ecosystem shines through in an unlicensed parka from the Canadian Garment Company of Winnipeg with its embroidered penguin motifs, animals native to the Antarctic region. An Aljak man's parka, the only man's example found during this research, also shows some aesthetic liberty in its design. This Kul-e-Tuk attests to the trend for more natural-looking fake furs in its imitation of the dappled look of sealskin, but it has a spread collar in lieu of a hood, very similar to a woman's parka appearing in a Saskatoon Hudson's Bay ad from 1965. On the other hand, for customers looking for an authentic Inuit design, Lydia styles like this red parka from 1963, with its brocade, ribbon, and rickrack trim, clearly references the traditional Inuvialuit-style geometric decoration we saw at the beginning of this presentation. Another example from the same year, a natural cream-colored Kul-e-Tuk with cut and sewn triangular-shaped contrasting fur adornments, recalls the ancient tooth motif found on indigenous Arctic clothing in Siberia, North America, and Greenland. By the turn of the 1970s, the hype around the Kul-e-Tuk had started to wane, but I'd like to take a moment to discuss the last gasps of the style as it relates to three Kitty Togs children's parkas. In 1967, manufacturers took advantage of the surge of patriotism around the national centennial celebrations and the influx of tourists expected to attend Montreal's Expo 67. Chatelaine magazine recommended quintessentially Canadian souvenirs to consumers, including either Inuit-made or commercially manufactured parkas to commemorate the important year. Licensed and unlicensed Kul-e-Tuks were embroidered with centennial logos, provincial coats of arms, or adorned with maple leaf embroideries and appliques. Although it dates from 1964, a dark brown acrylic fur example is emblazoned with a fleur-de-lis applique, attesting to Kitty Tog's acknowledgement of and capitalization on Quebec's distinct cultural identity. This parka had been donated to the museum in 2005 and was a great discovery for me during the course of my research. The last two Kul-e-Tuks, red and light brown Kitty Tog's baby parkas, date from 1977 and correspond to an illustration for Woodward's department store in Vancouver. Both have the addition of back neck seams and hoods with drawstrings. Curious as in 1959, the one-piece back and hood construction was touted as revolutionary in that it ensured a perfect close fit without the need of additional closures. The aesthetic similarities between this 1979 light brown or 1977 light brown parka and the caribou beige style from 1960, however, bears witness to how fossilized the design and styling of children's Kul-e-Tuks remained over the course of its 20 years of popularity. The last known depiction of a child's acrylic Kul-e-Tuk, sold with matching nylon snow pants, appeared in a Quebec City Sears ad in late 1980, and the trademark for the Kitty Togs brand name was expunged in 1990. The style endured, however, thanks to vintage resale markets. Nigo, founder of Japanese streetwear brand A Bathing Ape and artistic director for Kenzo, is a renowned collector of vintage Americana fashion like denim, workwear, and sports apparel, which he draws heavily on for design inspiration. Examples of Bathing Ape fake fur parkas from the early 2000s show uncanny similarities in style and trimming to the Kul-e-Tuk. It's highly likely that Nigo holds one in his archive and simply copied the design without understanding the parka's problematic history. This whirlwind look at the Kul-e-Tuk begs the question, what factors contributed to its success, becoming, as the Hudson's Bay Company called, the coat of the age, and a staple of Canadian winter fashion? I'd like to take the remainder of my time today to situate the parkas within Canada's mid-20th century socio-political climate. Let's start with DuPont of Canada Limited, subsidiary of the American chemical giant, and how the intense marketing of its synthetic fibers in the post-war era played a pivotal role in the Kul-e-Tuk's dissemination. DuPont of Canada's Textile Fibers Department and Fashion Bureau cleverly collaborated with fashion insiders or intermediaries, such as designers, buyers, manufacturers, journalists, textile mills, and retailers, to promote apparel made from synthetics. As a major North American center for mass market garment manufacturing during the mid-20th century, Montreal was an ideal location for DuPont of Canada's headquarters, and in all likelihood, Kitty Togs, Kul-e-Tuk licensees like Lydia, and affiliated textile producer Newlands and Company were such intermediary organizations. As the majority of Kul-e-Tuks used 3 synthetic fibers, Orlon acrylic and nylon, plus the occasional Dacron polyester lining, DuPont had a vested interest in marketing the parkas far and wide. The publicity efforts orchestrated and paid for by DuPont across North America made certain that the Kul-e-Tuk had top-of-mind awareness with consumers from day one. The first Kitty Togs Kul-e-Tuk ads were DuPont-sponsored, offering retailers free supportive merchandising materials to educate the consumers as to the benefits of Orlon and nylon. In fact, Kitty Togs won a Judy Award for Outstanding Promotion of Canadian Fashions in late 1959 for this stellar campaign. In collaboration with the CBC, DuPont took advantage of the new medium of television and produced commercials and wholesome weekly family programs throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s. Initially Father Knows Best, and later National Velvet, with the occasional DuPont Show of the Month, all acted as covert infomercials in which actors were dressed in synthetic fiber fashions, including Kul-e-Tuks. The Quebec Winter Carnival Duchesses wardrobes were donated by DuPont between 1960 and 1965, as were the Kul-e-Tuks for the Canadian Olympic team. In the United States, ads for licensee were again DuPont sponsored, and a boys' parka made an appearance on the cover of Better Living magazine for company employees. Photos of Elizabeth wearing her Kul-e-Tuk in a Iqaluit were published in DuPont magazine, leading one to surmise the bill for the promotional Arctic trip was paid for by the company. Countless Canadian department stores held promotional ski fashion shows throughout the 60s, featuring Lydia Kul-e-Tuks, all sponsored by DuPont. The involvement of DuPont of Canada, with its deep pockets and total marketing concept, also shines a light on corporate greed and arrogance. The notion of progress a conceptual cornerstone of mid-20th century Western modernism, was also a key philosophy of DuPont, along with material abundance and scientific discovery, and was reflected in its slogan at the time, "Better things for better living through chemistry." The company believed that the durability, easy care, bright colors, and cheap price of its synthetic fibers made significant improvements to an age-old Inuit design. And the Kul-e-Tuk was framed and promoted as a stellar example of DuPont's mandate of progress at work. DuPont's explosives, however, were regularly used in oil speculation and resource extraction projects in the Arctic during the post-war period, and its philosophy of advancement and discovery in actuality caused significant harm to northern ecosystems. Synthetic fibers are furthermore derivatives of petrochemicals and not biodegradable. Again, ironic considering DuPont's progressive stance, as today, synthetics are a major contributor to microplastic pollution in marine environments, acrylic in particular. The proliferation of the Kul-e-Tuk style was also entangled in national and political agendas of the era, in particular, the crafting of both individual and collective Canadian identity through the appropriation of Inuit clothing, the Arctic region, and by extension, a colonization of winter itself. Let's start with downhill skiing. In the affluent post-war era, downhill ski resort tourism was on the rise, and the sport became infused with a rampant consumerism that included luxurious hotels, fine dining, and fashionable equipment and apparel. In the commodified world of ski culture, where what you wear is as important as your sportsmanship, Inuit-style outerwear served individual needs to make a fashion statement, as it is by its nature aesthetically bold and graphic, and aligned with the era's modernist style, characterized by clean lines and high functionality. Across North America, however, ski fashion additionally worked to legitimize the wearer's competency on the slopes and in cold weather. Norwegian knitwear and German brands like Obermeyer and Bogner were incredibly popular, referencing European Nordic and Alpine locations and their established ski prowess. Appropriated circumpolar indigenous styles were everywhere. Icelandic sweaters co-opted from the beaded shrugs of Greenland's Inuit people, and Sami après-ski looks alluded to wintry northern regions. Woven alpaca ponchos copied from traditional indigenous Quechua designs invoked the mountainous Andean landscape of Peru. The wearing of Kul-e-Tuk served a similar function, positioning settlers as native to the Canadian landscape through claiming indigenous identity and visually communicating a supposed mastery over Arctic climates through the appropriation of Inuit sartorial technology and winter wisdom. Inuit-style parkas were prolific at the time as both ski and après-ski wear, from mass-market models like the Kul-e-Tuk to high-end designer apparel, such as an Irving of Montreal seal and wolverine parka, donated to the museum with a Saint Sauveur lift ticket in its pocket. Collective Canadian identity was also entangled in the Kul-e-Tuks and linked to government initiatives that pulled focus on the Arctic region at the time. First, let's talk about the Massey Commission, that in 1951 stressed the necessity of developing Canada's cultural identity and encouraged citizens to look within for patriotic symbols to which nationalistic meaning and mythology could be attached. In order to distinguish itself from the United States and Britain, Canada had to connect to geographical place, and the Inuit were perceived by settler populations as a living embodiment of the northern landscape. Advertising copy for the Kul-e-Tuks romanticized the Inuit as Canada's hardy, original folk, frozen in the past, and their authentic clothing as part of Canadian heritage, which legitimized the co-opting of their sartorial traditions into national identity projects that aimed to provide settlers with a native link to the land. In a similar vein, Inuit cultural/territorial appropriation was connected to Canadian sovereignty over the Arctic. During the anxious early years of the Cold War, when militarization of the North was seen as a necessity to protect from possible over-the-pole Soviet attacks, the Canadian government framed the Arctic as homeland to justify the geographical conquest of building the distant early warning line, a series of radar stations stretching from Alaska to Greenland, in collaboration with the American military between 1954 and 1957. The ambitious project captured the imagination of Canadians, thanks to journalists reporting regularly from the Arctic on the lifestyle and culture of the Inuit, including the frequent mention of the traditional clothing worn by men hired as workers in terms of its suitability to the polar climate. Canadians assimilated Inuit apparel as a symbol of dominion over the hotly contested Arctic region and engaged in patriotic consumption practices by wearing support for national land claims on their backs. But what of the Inuit themselves? We already touched on how, by the mid-20th century, Inuit life had drastically changed, and many had been forced to settle in permanent communities and participate in capitalist cash-based economies due to colonial interventions and resource extraction in the Arctic. Arts and crafts like carvings, prints, and embroidered fur-trimmed parkas became important sources of income, but are also significant for how they document traditional ways of life before colonization, visually representing Inuit histories and culture on their own terms. The McCord Stewart holds a number of these parkas from across Nunavut, Nunavik, and Labrador, made by Inuit women working independently from their homes or through organizations like the Inuvik Sewing Center. Parkas were sold as souvenir items to settlers working in the region or exported wholesale to Southern retailers through the cooperative Canadian Arctic Producers. It's well documented how Inuit craftswomen were promoting their designs and attempting to generate income for themselves and their families by participating in the Western fashion system at the time. Young Inuit women organized the first fashion show held in Inuvik in 1960, for example, which featured locally made animal skin, wool duffel, and brightly colored Mother Hubbard-style cotton parkas. In 1968 and 1969, the Eskimo Canada trade show at Montreal's Place Bonaventure showcased a variety of Inuit-made products, including a parka-filled fashion show that was touted as stylish options for women's ski and après-ski wear. Unfortunately, the price gouging on wool fabrics by the Hudson's Bay Company stores in the north, the region's primary retailers, resulted in the Inuit-made parkas being very expensive, on average $100 in the mid-60s, or the equivalent of almost $1,000 today, more than double the price of an appropriated Lydia Kul-e-Tuk.
Furthermore, the relatively small-scale, high-quality production of Inuit craftswomen could not compete with the capacity of Montreal's manufacturing industry and the large volume of mass-produced appropriations it flooded the Southern market with. Between 1959 and 1961 alone, wholesale Kul-e-Tuk orders and royalties netted Kitty Togs the equivalent of approximately $6 million today, with Inuit people completely erased from the substantial profits earned from their stolen intellectual property. In conclusion, the case of the Kul-e-Tuk is simply one example of how Indigenous people are mythologized yet rendered invisible in colonial systems like Canada. It is a story of cultural appropriation and the dynamics of domination and subordination which result from unbalanced power relationships due to colonialism. In a colonial system, a sartorial hierarchy is established in which European dress is viewed as superior to or more advanced than that of Indigenous people. Design intervention was deemed necessary on the part of the Kul-e-Tuk manufacturers to render Inuit parkas more fashionable for the Southern Canadian market. It was honestly felt that no harm was done and that the Inuit should be flattered that their material culture would even be desirable to settler populations in the first place. This perceived superiority and power imbalance, reinforcing European cultural and political dominance, prevented any sort of meaningful cross-cultural exchange between settler Canadians and the Inuit. Given the dire state of the contemporary Western fashion landscape, With its hyperconsumption, wastefulness, environmental pollution, and human exploitation, much could be learned from Indigenous knowledge and fashion systems in terms of ecological stewardship and sustainability, a slower, smaller mode of production, fine craftsmanship, and in terms of the ethical use of animal skins, true cradle to cradle design practices. Thank you.